and welcome to another exciting episode of The Energy That Surrounds Us. And a little note that I am going to announce is tonight's episode is actually the 99th episode of The Energy That Surrounds Us. So I think that's pretty cool. And I am so excited to have an amazing guest to celebrate this with. And also, tomorrow night, for a special night as well as this night, will be the 100th episode. So if you're tuning into this one, make sure you tune into both, because both these episodes are episodes I feel like you all are going to truly enjoy, because I've even been learning things about these episodes coming up for you that I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I have this coming on the show and finally get to talk about this. So I am going to stop rambling and celebrating, and I am going to turn it over to the amazing, wise, the truly awesome, and I am enjoying getting to know Jessica Williams Newhook.
Thank you. And did you know the number 9 is about completion?
I did.
So that's exciting.
But we're not completing the series. We're still got more to come.
Absolutely. No, we can celebrate the completion of my thesis, though.
Yes.
I'm going to forever celebrate that.
And so those that are tuning in who may not know you from JV's work, and I know that's how I met you, was through her. Can you give the audience a little bit of your background and what you do?
So I am in the world of psychic ability, and I use that word loosely because I know that the term psychic can be very loaded in nature. I have a variety of different talents and gifts that I've done. I grew up in a family that saw and heard spirit randomly in different places in my world. So I grew up with it being kind of normalized in a way. My grandmother taught me how to read tea leaves starting around the age of 7. And I would pull it out every now and then for party tricks to wow people. And often people would be like, oh my God, I can't believe you saw that way after the fact of being able to see things. Later in life, I moved on to tarot. So I read tea leaves and tarot. In tarot, I didn't really know too much about the history of tarot or what I wanted to do with tarot, and it kind of led into my master's thesis, which is about the religion of tarot. So I have my degree in human resource management, and then my master's degree in religious studies. So a unique connection indeed. Then, as I've been, of course, developing my third eye, I'm what they call clairaudient. So I clearly hear, and I can see, so also clairvoyance. I do channeling and mediumship, as well as I will clear homes from spirit guests. And as I've had a lot of different spirit encounters throughout my lifetime, and just it's just such a part of my regular life that I just now go, okay, well, this is normal. Just like as I grew up, it was normalized. I consider it a very normal thing. I know that I've run into people who think that I'm just full of whatever, and I let them have their experiences, but I know the truth of mine. So I leave it there at that. Yeah, so that's what I do.
That is amazing. And as I mentioned when I was introducing you, learning new things that I'm excited to bring is I have yet to have a tea leaf reader on my show because I never thought I would ever find one. So I was like, over the moon when I finally saw that in your write up, and I was like, oh my gosh, so I gotta totally ask her about that. So before we get into tarot, could you kind of give a background of how you read tea leaves, or is it like too involved?
No, everything can be really involved, or everything has degrees. You can get really, really involved with it, or kind of take a step back. So, a high level view of tea leaf reading is basically it's a form of tasseomancy. That's the official term of it. And so what you do is you basically have loose leaf tea in a teacup. You want to make sure that your teacup is white inside, that it doesn't have any designs or anything that's going to interfere with your leaf reading. And you just basically take a look at the leaves and see what comes out of you. Sometimes there's not a lot that comes out. Sometimes it can be just a big blob, and that's okay too. But what I find with tea leaf reading is that with the cup that I read, and this is just for me, is that when you do it, you want to leave just the tiniest little bit of liquid over top of the leaves. And then I swirl it around and dump it onto the saucer. And then I'll get the person to spin it 3 times and make a wish. So they can have good positive things coming for them. The first thing I'm going to do is read the tea leaves that are in the saucer. So I take a look at the how much water is in the saucer. I take a look at what's happening, because that's kind of like what's happening now. And then when I look at the cup, of course, every cup has the handle um, that that starts the count for 12 months. So I'll take a look at, okay, so what is this month, next month, third month, fourth month, fifth month, sixth month, all the way down to 12 months. Around the edges of the cup, and then right at the bottom of the cup is generally soul stuff. So this is something that is from your spirit or your soul self, that might have a message coming through. So depending on where the leaves land in relation to those different sections of the cup will determine a kind of timing. And then, of course, depending on what you see is depending on what the message is.
And I'm glad you said that because I was imagining you had to get rid of all the liquid, and then I'm like, well, then you accidentally drank some of the leaves. So does that cause the message to become disjointed because you don't have all the leaves to read?
No, because I mean, when I tip over the cup and put it into the saucer, I'm also going to give it a shake. So any excess leaves that aren't supposed to be in the cup come out onto the saucer.
Right.
So really, I mean, you are going to swallow leaves when you have just loose leaf tea. It's one of the things. So that's the downside of tea leaf reading. We've gotten to the point where we just don't drink a lot of um, teas that are loose leaf anymore, because everything's in bags and filtered out, because we don't like that unpleasantness. So that's the one downside of it, is that you do have it. And if you're not a tea drinker, there's many different kinds. You can use basically anything. So I have a chamomile. This is just the chamomile flowers that are dried. They call it chamomile tea. Technically isn't a tea, but we'll just call it a tea. You can use that. You can use black tea. You can use green tea. You can use basically anything that has leaves. Even you can use coffee grinds if you want to do that. But they're
Yeah,
worse.
I was gonna say coffee grinds. I'm having a hard enough time wrapping my head around reading a tea leaf, and coffee grounds. No, I'm like, no, I'm not even gonna even attempt that. But I'm wondering, when you do the tea leaves, we talk about, you having the water in there and then you dump it on the saucer. Is there, do you think, a difference if someone was to drink from the cup to the point and then dump it, or just put a little bit in there, have them swirl it around and dump it?
Well, you generally want them to get their energy to, it's like any type of object that you're trying to read. So in psychometry, you're taking an item of somebody's and you're reading it, right? You're basically getting the energy off of it. Tarot cards, however the person gets the person's energy into the cards, because the idea is that you want to get their energy into it. It's generally recommended that you at least take a couple sips. But the idea is that, like, are you getting your energy into it and are you getting your intention into it? Because as
Right.
long as you're doing that, as long as you're getting your energy and intention into that cup with the leaves, then you are going to be able to be successful and have a reading.
Yeah, I was just thinking for the people who are listening to this who are like, yeah, I don't drink tea and I don't drink coffee, but I'd really like the reading and going, maybe there's a way you could make it work, or I guess if
Generally
you
in
have to do
those,
two sips ain't so bad.
yeah, and generally if that's the case, then the person that you have reading, just let them know that you don't really want a whole lot. And they'll make sure the liquid is minimal, because the idea is that you don't want a lot of liquid left in the cup when you go to do the reading. You want very, very little bit. um, just like a very slight skim over the top of the leaves that are in the cup itself. So
Yeah.
you want to keep it minimal.
I'm kind of curious because you stated doing your thesis on tarot that you looked into the history of it. Have you ever looked into the history of tea leaves and how that started?
No, I haven't really looked into the history of tea leaves. Tarot has a very direct lineage that goes back to Italy, and a card game that the nobles used to play. So it actually was a very secular tool that they use for entertainment. That became esoteric later on. Um, Whereas tea leaves have always been kind of, I think, part of that, throwing of bones, and, it's just always kind of been around, at least as far as around in relation to tea, as long as tea's been around. I'm not sure if that goes back to China. I'm not sure, but it would be something to definitely do some research on for sure.
I think China would be a strong way to start, and I don't know why, but I keep thinking gypsies when I think of the tea leaves.
Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily go with the gypsies right off the bat. I mean, so so they were part of the Roma people that were kind of displaced in relation to their movements and everything else. And so, as a form of survival, they did participate in doing a lot of these arts, but so their culture does kind of roam around the idea of psychic and the use of psychics. Um, but there were many cultures that participated, that we know just from even just indigenous tribes around today. There's a variety of different ways of being able to do this type of reading, to be able to kind of see what's forthcoming. So it's not necessarily just one particular group. Like tarot cards, really, they were used by the Romna people, but they weren't necessarily developed by you know,
Right.
the people that were roaming. So, I hesitate to say that they were kind of they may have helped move the information around, and so in that part their role was very integral, but I don't know that they created the art of tea leaf reading, but it's definitely something to look into.
No, I think the creation would be China because tea is really big in their community. And I do seem to remember reading about, you know, when they would come to proposals and families looking at arranging things. I have a strong vision of, and I don't know why, but either like the grandmother or the family would hire someone to read the tea leaves to see if it would be a beneficial match, and sitting there thinking, your livelihood is dependent on a tea leaf reading. Lord help you.
Well, and I do know like places like Turkey, they would read coffee grains. So there is, and it kind of, when I first learned about that, I was like, oh, I suppose, yeah, it'd be similar. So I do know that, this type of divination has been around for a while. And so, and the whole art of esoteric is revealing the symbols, and human nature is to find meaning in symbols.
Right.
So there's definitely a connection there.
Well, and it could have gotten to Turkey and Italy because of Marco Polo and his travels on the Silk Road. I'm sure he came across tea leaf readers and probably came back and was like, "Oh my gosh, you guys have to hear about this. I never had this experience, but you've got to try this." And then it probably spread west, and like gunpowder came through that way. And so it's possible, you know,
Hmm.
that's where it originated from and everything. And I'm kind of curious a little bit, and then we'll go into the, I don't know if the correct pronunciation is tarot or tarot. I've heard it both ways.
Yeah, it's depending on who's what the accent is. I learned it as tarot, but I do know there's many people who do pronounce it as
Yeah.
tarot.
But I find it interesting how, and I want to make it clear, when I was joking about the, families being arranged by tea leaves, I wasn't joking like making fun of it. I was just like, more like, oh my gosh, it's kind of an unusual way to do that. And so I don't want people to get the idea that I'm making fun of that ancient people and tradition, because I'm not. I actually have great respect for the ancients and their traditions. But what my last question around the tea leaves is, how do you feel like people, when they're reading the tea leaves, how do you know who is actually reading the tea leaves and who is not just trying to save their skin and tell you what you want to hear, kind of feeling? Is there a way to tell?
I think, I mean, for myself, I mean, I've seen some not great stuff in tea leaves. So I remember doing a tea leaf reading for a woman, and I actually saw one of the very few times I see death. I don't see death very often in my readings, but this one was very obvious. This person was going to be passing away. And when you run into a situation where you have to deliver information that may not be favorable, um, the legit reader will pause for a moment and figure out how best to be able to deliver the information, so it's going to be received in the best way possible. I mean, in that case, she did already know that the person was passing away. Like they were pretty much in a prolonged medical situation where the end result was going to be death. And so they knew that it was upon them. And so the leaves just kind of showed them when it was going to happen. But at that point, it wasn't so much about the death itself, it was about the preparation that they needed to do prior to make sure that once that person was ready to pass through the veil and move on to the other side, that there was that they had done all the work that they needed to do on this part with that person to make that passing and that transition as easy as possible for them. Whereas when you get somebody who just wants to tell you what you want to hear, they just won't even say anything at all. And it's really hard to sort that out, because there are lots of people who don't want to hear bad news. There's just some people who just don't want to hear the message that's coming through. I had one client come up to me I do fairs and markets as well, and they're like going, "How do I know if you're good?" And I'm like, "Well, that's a loaded question because there's a lot of, and it's the same with tea leaf readers, right? There's a lot that goes into it, right? So how open are you to receiving the message? How clear are they able to make sense and describe the information that's coming in a way that's understandable for you? Um, are you you know, if you're closed down and your energy is closed, or if the reader itself if they're having difficulties that day, and aren't necessarily connecting with spirit easily, that can impact your decision, and your reading, as well as everything is free will, right? So we have this element that, you go in and you get a reading and you're like, that's not going to work. Like, I'm going to change direction. You can totally go, instead of going right, you go left, and you change everything that just happened. So it's really, those types of questions are kind of hard to answer, because like, you will get people who don't want to, who won't divulge anything about death at all. They're just like, no, it's not ethical. And so really, understanding the ethics of your reader and how they're going to move forward, um, really helps as well. So when you talk about ethics, things like, okay, if I'm sitting in a room and I'm at a party and I start getting messages from or about somebody, I'm not going to just kind of pounce on them in the middle of a party where they don't even know me from a hole in the ground and go, "Oh my God, you're getting this message from your grand." Like, that to me is very invasive, because these things are very, very personal and private, right? And so for me, I'm not going to be doing that. So, but if you're paying for me to be able to do that, and, and I'm really struggling with trying to get a message, or if I'm struggling, then I shut it down and be like, I'm not the reader for you, because this energy isn't matching. So really, talk to the reader as well about, okay, well, kind of what are your boundaries? What are your go-to? Some people won't do health readings at all. They're like, no, that is a doctor's job. I will not touch that with a 10-foot pole. Some people won't deal with death. Um, I will do health readings and I will do death, but I will not spy on your neighbor for you. So if you want to know if your neighbor's having an affair, none of your business. I'm not going there.
Yeah, that isn't. And I gotta say, I started laughing a little bit when you got excited. Is you almost sounded like what we call here in America the Valley Girl, or this is like you were like oh my god, and I was like, wow, she went like total '80s Valley Girl right there.
I am a Gen Xer, but never lived in the valley.
Oh no, that's cool. And so I'm curious, and I'm going to use this question to kind of transition topics a little bit. Is being from Newfoundland, and I think I pronounced it right that time. Haha. Do you think like the tea leaf readings, tarot, and all the metaphysical like modalities are more open in that area, or do you think it's just the same as anywhere else where you still got to be careful where you mention you can do this because people will start to look at you weird?
So I grew up in Calgary, Alberta, and then moved to Newfoundland in 2014. And what's really interesting about that question is that I actually have a little bit of a comparison to make in relation to um to to this, because it's similar to everywhere else, as in, like, there's a bit of a shroud over it. It's still kind of frowned upon. But with Newfoundland versus, say, Alberta, I've noticed that there is a slight more of a religious ideology around it. So if you are very super conservative Christian, um, as long as you're providing messages from God, like if this is your God-given right in some circles, it's okay. Um, they would kind of separate it out. Like everybody knew an aunt or a grandma or, a niece or cousin that did tea leaf reading or did some sort of reading. And they would do it on the sly, right? They would read the tea leaves and they're like, yeah, I'm going over to, Aunt Joan's house and we're gonna sit down and have coffee. And that was kind of like, and then Aunt Joan would grab your cup and read your leaves. It was part of like just kind of average stuff that they would do, but they wouldn't necessarily, they're not really open about it. They don't really talk about it too much. Um, when I moved here, I did make a lot of friends in the kind of metaphysical community here, and a lot of them talked about that nobody talked about it. Like everybody had experiences, and everybody would mention them on occasion, but you could only say so much before the conversation was shut down, which is very different from my upbringing. But then in Alberta, I had a situation where I was actually at dinner with somebody, and my first husband, and we were talking, and then it got into like, oh yeah, I read tea leaves, so I'm not sure. And then we got onto the topic of tarot, and they actually asked me to leave their house because they were just so ultra Christian that they couldn't have me in their house because I participated in something that was considered very evil to them. So so the so that was like very much in your face, but in Alberta, I was in tea shops reading tea leaves all the time, and I was out in public with my tarot cards in coffee shops, or I'd meet up with clients in a coffee shop to do a reading. Like it wasn't even a second guess. But here it's more covert. So people much rather want to come to my house to be able to have a reading, or do it online, or do it on the telephone. Having fairs and doing markets is relatively new for Newfoundland, or particularly St. John's. So it's an interesting thing to see kind of how the world is like starting to really embrace this. Like tarot is just really increasing in popularity, and so you're seeing more people interested, and younger people interested, and so they're curious. And so having tarot cards at a coffee shop is starting to be like a lot more okay, not so covert. So
Talking about online, I started thinking, okay, yeah, I've seen tarot cards done online and oracle cards online. And I think it's even possible, probably even to do palm reading online.
mhm.
But then I was like, tea leaves. What do you do? Tell someone, okay, now take a couple sips, flip the cup over, take a photo, show me what you see. And it's like, how could you do a tea leaf reading actually online?
That's exactly. I mean, I had a girlfriend from BC that was here in Newfoundland. She made arrangements with her friend back in BC to do tea leaf readings for everybody. And that's exactly, we basically drank the tea where we were, and then we would show the cup and turn it, and just like, and turn it around so she could see it, and take a look at it and get different angles at it.
And I know I said I was going to switch out of it, but I just had a thought about the tea leaves, and I promise I'll stop asking about it. Is I'm curious if someone was like getting a tea leaf reading and you're reading the saucer, and like you were saying, you pause and you're like, oh, I had this bad news. If someone was to bump the table or bump the saucer, could it alter the tea leaves, and in that case alter the message, or
Well,
is it
probably,
pretty well set?
I mean, the message is already given to me, right? So they can definitely bump the table. The tea leaves in a saucer, depending on how much liquid is there. Like if there's a lot of liquid, yeah, I mean, it will definitely move the leaves, so I won't be able to show them what it is that I saw that brought through the message, but the message is there. It doesn't really change the message that way. The
Okay.
leaves in the cup, though, to really change the leaves in the cup, you almost have to like wash them out. Because don't forget, like when I take the cup and I'm like shaking it, what's in there is in there now,
Right,
right?
it's
So
dried.
the movement of the leaves in the actual cup, which is more where I spend most of my time, is pretty much set there, you know.
Okay. I was just trying to figure out if there was a way to alter the message and be like, "Oh, good, I got out of the bad news because I did this." But
Well, and oftentimes, like I'll have people that will come in and be like, "Don't tell me anything about death." It's like, okay. So then I don't tell them anything about death. If anything comes up that would be kind of like that, it would be like, nope, we're not going to go there. We'll move on. I've never had that experience where somebody who's like, I don't want this information, um, actually come up, and then I've had to ignore it. Usually, the information that they're looking for is provided. So, but it can be very deep and very emotional. So. I just have one fun story to share about one lady I did a tea leaf reading for. This was back in Alberta, and she had chosen chamomile tea to drink, and she finished drinking. And I got into her cup and I looked at it, and there were fairies everywhere in her cup. And I was just like, you really like fairies. And like she was about 90 years old when I read her leaves. And she just turned into this little girl right in front of me. It's like, my fairies. And it was just like, she just knew that they were there. And I'm like, okay, so, but you're also missing a lot of things and they're misplacing things on you. And she's like, yeah. And I'm like, okay, you need some boundaries because they're like overtaking your life, right? And she just loved that message. That was just, it was so anchored for her. And no one else's cup has ever come up like that. It was so it's interesting because it's so personalized. Like when you see something that's just so obviously that person. Another person, I saw dragons going through portholes, and she was like going, I really am trying to tap into dragon energy. And I was like, cool. Okay. So this is, and again, it was just like another confirmation that that is for that person. I'm not a dragon person, so I'm not going to get dragons in my cup. Um, and so it's just, and that that's where tea leaves are so unique, is because like tarot, it's pretty standard. Like you have, like I pull a card with tarot and I look at it and it's the picture. Like this is the picture, right? That's it. But with tea leaves, so this is the lovers card. Okay, so with tea leaves, I could see lovers, I could see the number 6, I could see people talking, I can see people walking away from each other, I can see a marriage, I can see an engagement, I can see a divorce, I can see it all, in different ways and different formats rather than just the lovers being straight up or upside down. And that's why I like tea leaves so much, is because there are so many different things. And then you just draw on the other beautiful thing about tea leaves is you draw on from your own personal experiences. So if I see cherries in a cup, for me, because I spent so much time in Alberta and I've been out to BC in the orchids, when I see cherries, I think of harvest. I think of picking, and they're a lot of work to pick.
oh,
Right? And so when I see that in a cup, I can be like, this is what this means for me. This is, and so, but for you, cherries may be like cherry pie and George Washington, right? People can have a different meaning attached to the symbol, but when you're doing a tea leaf reading, what comes forward for you in regards to that symbol will relate to that other person, and they'll be able to have a connection.
That's really cool. And I'm curious now, as you know, you mentioned doing the history of the tarot. Was there anything like that you came across with the history that was like, oh my God, I would never have thought that with this subject?
Well, I think the biggest thing that kind of stood out for me was that it started as a card game. It wasn't even a tool used for esoteric ideology at all. That the esoteric layers were developed after tarot existed. So it was the 1600s when tarot first started being kind of recognized in writings. There's some debate as to exactly where in Italy it started, but it seems to have been imported into Italy from somewhere else, and they haven't been able to track down exactly where that is yet. That it was cards that represented everyday life in Italy, and they had them specially made. So some of the earliest decks have gold inlay and really, really fine details. So that was fascinating. And then through time, especially around when Egypt mania really hit Europe and particularly France, because the cards were all over the country. You had tarot cards that were German and Swedish, Austrian, Dutch. Um, they were just everywhere, and every country had them, and every country had different ideas of them. But it wasn't until France during this big idea around Egypt. They had just discovered the pyramids. They had no idea what they were. And they had no idea about the Egyptian gods and what they represented and how they hadn't even figured out hieroglyphics at this point. So, and they just thought this was going to be a whole new opening of the Enlightenment. It was the beginning of the Enlightenment period. They were going to bring us the answers. This ancient information was going to provide us with all the answers to make life better. And so, as a result of that, they thought that tarot cards had these secret messages in them. And so they started studying them. And then they added Hermeticism, and they added astrology, and they added numerology, and they added information from the Kabbalah, Christian Kabbalah, not the Jewish Kabbalah. And then so they go through these different stages, and it's these different mages, so individual men that studied them on their own. And then you have the Golden Dawn. And the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn was a fringe Mason group, and that allowed women. So that was fun to have that particular information. But they really took a lot of time and layered so much meaning into tarot that when they dissolved, Arthur Waite, along with Pamela Coleman Smith, um, designed the what we call ancient tarot, but aren't really. They're only from 1910. The Rider Waite Coleman Smith deck, right? So that's the one that most people will recognize. But really, what it is an idealized version of the tarot based on all of these studies that these different mages did throughout France, primarily, and just layered upon layered upon layered of all these different ideas. And that's how it came into the tool that it is today. So the history of it is so fascinating, and it's just and there's still people that just play the game for playing the game. There's actually a game of tarot, with
I was
trumps.
going to say is Hoyle, if you buy the computer game of Solitaire, I think it is, or card games, Tarot is listed as one of the games that you can play. And I was like, it still is around today, and Hoyle will give you the directions.
Yeah, now I haven't figured out how to play the game because
I haven't either.
it's I guess a little bit more of a complicated trump game, kind of like bridge. So yeah, it's I'm like no.
Yeah,
And
I
the
don't have
problem is
time.
I start like getting into it, and then I'm like, oh, I wonder what my cards are going to tell me now, and then I start doing a reading, and then it's just like totally games out the window.
Be like, oh, the tower. Oh man, you wish you had the lovers card because you could totally trump that one. Oh wait, wrong. Sorry, didn't mean to play the game on you.
Yeah, so that's the fun thing about tarot, that I found out, and my thesis. The other thing that I found really interesting was that a lot of times practitioners, so people who practice tarot, practice it and do similar things that you will see other people do in other religions. So that's why my thesis is called The Tarot of Religion. Now, that is a very controversial topic. And there are people who will be like, no, it's not religion. Because they have the idea that Christianity is kind of like, when we say religion, we think Christianity, especially in the Western world. But my idea was like, no, wait a second. These people treat cards like religion, so they cover them in cloth. Well, Sikhs will cover their holy book in cloth, or you'll have like an opening of a sacred space or a closing of a sacred space, or you put crystals with it to make sure that they're protected, or the people will have ritual around the use of tarot when you're using it. So, and that's where I found that it actually very closely resembled a lot of the information from Stark and Glock, who in 1969 did a sociological study on Christianity and what it meant to be religious. So they interviewed thousands upon thousands of Christians, and then found five parts to what would be constituted as being a religious practice. And so then what I did was I interviewed practitioners and found that there was a lot of similarities, and it was just like, oh, okay, well, this is this and this is this. So it was very interesting in that regard.
I'm curious in your research, did you come across, I believe it was mid to late 1800s, that people were actually using playing cards as tarot cards?
Well, so there is a hairdresser, Attila, who developed his own. He was a hairdresser and a wig maker. He had his own set of decks that he would use, and it was a combination of it was he created his own kind of a divination style thing. And it wouldn't surprise me that there were playing decks that were also used. I have used playing decks as far with tarot. It's all part of cartomancy. So anything that you're using, so oracle, tarot, playing cards, all fall under the art of cartomancy. It's just what art are you following at that time? So yeah, there people use all sorts of different things. It's not so much of the item that you're using, it's that you're allowing yourself to connect to your spirit or your inner self, right? To be able to get the messages necessary. That's more the purpose of what it is that sometimes we just need a guiding post to help us get there.
Right. And I'm glad you mentioned that because I was about to say or ask, if you're using playing cards, how do you do? And I believe, and my memory is a little bit fuzzy as the name, but is it the major and minor arcanes that are
Uh-huh.
like the tower, the lovers? And so if you're using playing cards, how do you distinguish the arcanes?
So there isn't any. Tarot has 78 cards. So you have your major arcanes and then your minor. So your minor or your pip cards. Your pip cards are basically your playing deck. That's the 52 cards. The rest of the cards are the major arcanes. So you have your hearts, your diamonds, your spades, and your clubs. And you know, hearts are cups, all have to do with emotion. Diamonds are pentacles, all have to do with money and grounding and everything else. Spades are swords, that has to do with the
Uh,
intellect and sometimes other things. So clubs are wands. You know, so uh, so you line it up with your suits that way, and then as long as you know your stuff, you go. Now I have a deck from Carl that's based on Jungian. Um, so Carl Jungian. And it does not have a lot to the deck. It's much more like you really have to know the major and minor arcana to be able to read it. But I can get some of my most accurate readings with that deck. It's absolutely incredible because a lot of the noise is gone. I'm not trying to guess at anything. It flows. It just comes right through. So anybody who chooses that deck, I know they're really open, and I'm going to get a really good reading.
and I'm curious your thoughts on. There's a lot of people who will say, "Yes, I read tarot. No, I don't read oracle," or "I only read oracle," or tarot and oracle are not the same thing. I I've always looked at them and read them the same. I'm curious your opinion on it.
I think that they are very different. So tarot has really throughout the centuries have really kind of defined themselves as 78 cards. You have your major and your minor arcana. Oracle doesn't have that. Oracle generally has a variety of different numbers of cards. I find that Oracle is a lot more positive than tarot. You tend not to get as bad news with Oracle. I call it my warm fuzzy stuff. So if you really want just a warm fuzzy reading, we pull out the oracle. If you really want to get down to the nitty gritty, tarot does not let you hide, whereas oracle does let you hide. That's just my experience of it. Now, there's others that may find that oracle doesn't let you hide too, but I have not had that experience myself.
Yeah. So when you say hide, I'm curious. So your experience is if you're asking a question, or do you even ask a question, or do you just read for them?
Depends on the person and what it is that they want. So if I have a friend who's like going, I really need you just to tune in on this question, then that's different. Most of the times when I get somebody in front of me, they just generally want a general reading. What's going on? What's going to happen? What do I need to watch out for? What's coming up? Um, Sometimes you'll get people who just don't want to really hear what you have to say. So I had one woman come up to me once. She was the one that wanted to know whether or not I was a good reader. Anyway, so she did end up sitting down and having a reading with me, and the reading was very simple. Stay out of everybody else's business. She did not like that at all. There was nothing that she enjoyed about that reading. Gave her her money back because I'm like going, you know what, I don't need your bad juju. But really the message is stay out of, and it was, the cards were just like, you're causing problems, you're mixing up communications, your family loves you, but you need to butt out of their business because they don't want you in their business. Like, you will be a much happier person and they will be much happier if you stay out of their business. That's what the message was coming forward in the story. And she did not like that at all. She was definitely not very happy.
Yeah, I don't see why she wouldn't like that.
Yeah, and it's funny because she went around to a couple other readers that were also at that fair that I was at, and it's funny because I didn't go searching for this information, but eventually over time they came back and through our different conversations, they're like, Oh yeah, I had her too. Yeah, that was the message. She didn't like me either, so and
You're
I'm
like,
like, well,
high five, we're in the club.
so so you do get people out there that just, they want what they want. They want the message that they want. And a lot of people I know that do readings just won't give you what you want to hear. They'll give you what you need to hear, and those aren't necessarily always the same thing, which is why I say you can't hide from tarot, because it
Right.
won't tell you what you want to hear.
And with that being said, I know there, this is to me is one of the hot things with doing readings, and one of the reasons why I don't do it so often anymore is everybody wants a timetable. And the universe does not work in time. So how do you handle the like 12
Timing.
months, six
Well, okay.
months?
So, but it does work in time too, right? Because when I do tea leaf readings, it's all timed out. You have 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, 5 months, right? Tarot's a little harder. Generally, what I'll do is I'll get messages. I read for another friend, and I was like, "You're going to get information around pregnancy around in June." Like I see pregnancy in June in relation to this was in her cup. And she was like, okay, well, maybe I'm going to have a baby next June or something. Nope, it was this June. She found out she was pregnant with her second child.
Oh,
And it was in June. So there are things that, the universe will be able to say, nope, this is what's going to happen. There's also time frames, and there also is no time. So the timing depends on what you do to make it happen. So especially love and relationships. Okay, so you want to talk about time where time does not exist? Love and relationships. That's where it does not exist. Everybody wants to know when they're going to meet their one, right? Well, tarot will always inevitably say something along the lines of, you're not ready. You haven't dealt with what you need to deal with. You're not going to get them until you're done that. Ooh, so the timing is up to you. So how fast are you going to work on what you need to work on?
yeah. Uh,
Or how long is it going to take you to let go of the person that you're attached to already? Because that is where that is going to come. So that's where time doesn't really exist.
yeah. And it's interesting you say that because I had a lady did a reading for me, and I asked about a relationship, and she goes, well, in 6 months, you're going to be in this mall and you're going to cross paths. And I was like, in 6 months or 6 weeks or 6 years, I don't go to that mall. So I don't think we're ever going to meet because you don't know me very well because I don't go to that mall. And it's like I have no reason to be in that mall. And so that was one of those moments where I was like, you know, was that, did I really screw up, you know, a possibility, or was that just someone just trying to throw me a bone and saying, hey, you know, let me kind of throw you a little bit of hope and say, go here.
Yeah, and that can happen. So I've had such, I've had, of course, I see readers as well. And I've had readers that are just like so way off about me. I'm just like, you are completely on another planet, um, and completely wrong with what they've said about me, but been bang on about family members. Nailed my kid to, and knew exactly everything that they said about my kid was absolutely bang on. Everything they said about my mom was bang on. Me, forget it, out to lunch. No idea what they were talking about. They're like, you're going to go see a 70-year-old aunt in the hospital. I'm like, I don't have an aunt, and So I'm not sure how I'm going to see a 70-year-old aunt in the hospital, right? So it was just like, and again, it's about understanding the language too. It was 3 years down the road. I did have a good friend that was in the hospital and she was 70. And so she was from here, and I see her as like a family member, a mother or aunt type figure, right?
Right.
Absolutely beautiful soul. And I went and saw her quite regularly. So also too, it's like, maybe it's not that particular mall, maybe it's just another mall. And she just happens to know that mall because that's what's in her mind as being that's what she knows. So sometimes it's the language that's used as well. So another example would be like when I am doing my readings, I'll pick up on energies. Now, the problem with picking up on energies is energies can be kind of flexible. They can be masculine and they can be feminine. So I could be talking about a person and using the pronouns he, but the actual person that I'm talking about is a she. It's just that she has very masculine energy, and that's what I'm picking up. Same with partners. So I'll pick up whether or not you have strong partner energy or weak partner energy or no partner energy. I don't know if you're married. I don't know if you're engaged. I don't know if you're getting a divorce. Like, all I know is that I'm picking up on energy. And so I will ask, this is the energy that I'm picking up on. Are you married? And they're like, yes or no. I'm like, okay. Well, if I'm not picking up on any partner energy and you're saying to me that you're married, we're in trouble. This relationship is not good
Right.
because there's a major disconnect that's gone on, and you're basically acting as an independent person. Right. And so so I read energies. I don't necessarily read, I'm not looking for the ring on the finger. I'm not looking for it's like, nope, this is what I'm picking up. So you're going to have to help me by filling in some blanks for me because I don't know the full story.
Well, and I'm curious, we're getting close to the top of the hour. Do you have time to go a little bit more,
Yep,
or
I
do
have
you
time.
need? Okay. I'm curious with you, with your readings, if you've ever had the experience of you're saying, like, hypothetically, hey, I'm seeing this red truck, and the person's like, there is no red truck. I don't know what you're talking about with the red truck.
I'll
And
just
you're
leave
like,
it with
well,
you. I'll just leave it with you. And maybe the red truck will have some significance for you down the road.
okay. I was curious if you, because I know some people are, no, that they really want you to acknowledge this and will keep harping on it, as what I call it, or do you just let it go and move on? And so obviously you said, yeah, I'll leave you with that and figure it out. And I'm curious, do you get calls like people are like, oh my God, remember when you told me this? And I said, no, I actually had that happen.
I do. I do. I remember one time, I also do house parties, so I'll go out to groups of people. And when I do that, sometimes they'll have a friend that comes in with them. And I remember doing this one reading for this woman. And she turned around, she looked at me, and she's like, you know what? That's my friend. Like, you're reading my friend. I don't know how you got our energies mixed up, but you're reading my friend. And I'm like, you just sit with that and you take that with you. And then her friend came in and I sat down, they switched sheets and I did the reading for her friend, and it was definitely her friend. She's like, yep, this is me. Anyways, that other person, she messaged me back, I think a week afterwards, and she goes, oh my God, that was not my friend. Everything you told me just happened to me this week. She's like, I can't believe it. Like, I honestly thought that that was just my friend, but it was all me. And so that's, I do. And that's why I just leave it with people and just be like, if it doesn't make sense to you now, and if we need to review it a little bit, we will. But let's move on to the rest of the reading. And then I'll leave it with you. If it's still not ringing a bell or bringing anything forward, you know, there's there's a message in there for you. I obviously don't know what it is right now. So it's probably for you to discover a little bit later on.
Right.
And that's the other thing about being psychic and the word psychic, right? You have this idea that, you know, it, it's like TV. You know, they lay out the cards at the beginning of the movie and how they lay out the cards and tell the stories, how the movie is going to happen. And so people think that because you're psychic, you should be able to be so incredibly precise that nobody could ever doubt anything you say. But that's not how it works because you're I'm reading energy, and energy is malleable, and energy changes and it shifts, you know. We're shifting all the time. And so we ebb and flow just like the tides of the ocean. No two ocean tides are the same. You could be on the same beach every day for a year. No two tides are the same.
Right.
It's the same with this energy. It's everywhere all the time, and it ebbs and flows. And if you make a different decision, you know, it can change. So, I mean, I'll talk about my own personal experience with readers. So I had a reader tell me, and I had many, many readers tell me constantly, you're going to find, because I had divorced my husband, and I was like, this really sucks. I don't like being single, you know. And they kept telling me, you're going to meet somebody. You are absolutely. And I was like, I don't believe you because it's not happening. So you want to talk about time, right? They'd be like, oh yeah, it's going to be 6 months, right? Well, it didn't happen in 6 months, you know. And they'd be like, oh, it's going to happen within the year. And so then I was like, okay, stop giving me timelines because this is ridiculous. I'm never going to meet my man. Like this, never going to happen. And then I had a gentleman tell me, he's like, I don't know when this is going to happen for you because you have some stuff to go through. But when you meet this person, they are going to have 3 kids. I was like, oh, who has, I'm like, 3 kids? He's like, yep, he's going to have 3 kids. And your kid's going to be the oldest of the, you know, so you're going to have, I have my son, and then 3 other kids. And your kid's going to be the oldest. And it has to be that way because your kid needs to be the oldest. He really does, right? And so he kind of described it, and I was like, yeah, okay. Then I had another psychic tell me, okay, you're going to meet three people this year. One that you're compatible with, and you guys are going to get along really, really great, but it's just not right. One's going to come back from the past and want to hook up with you again, and one's married. And I was like, great. That doesn't tell me like, and she goes, go for the married one. I was like, what? Like, are you insane? Right? Who's going to break up a family?
Yeah.
Right? 3 months after that reading, I met my husband. His wife had passed away the year before and was still presenting himself as married.
Ah,
And so, because he was presenting himself as married, she read his energy as married
that
because of
makes
that kind of,
sense.
right. So soon after we started dating, he stopped thinking of himself as married, started thinking himself as single and dating again. Because I was like, we can't do this married thing. This isn't going to work. Like, I'm not breaking up a marriage. So we're not doing that because I'm not breaking up anybody's marriage.
Yeah.
Right. And so then it shifted again. And he had 3 kids. And the three
Wow.
kids was predicted 5 years earlier. Because
Yeah.
I write down everything, right? I have a little journal that I write my readings in. And I found the reading. It was 5 years ago that he had said 3 kids.
And I'm curious because if I remember reading your bio correctly, you had mentioned tarot and the paranormal. What how does the tarot work with the paranormal?
Well, so I I can see spirit in form and I hear spirit in form. And so what tarot is just like it's like almost like a compass point. It's just pointing a direction for me in
Uh,
relation to being able to help people. Because if you think about it, like we have this huge energy, we have this huge universe that's larger than we can even possibly comprehend. And we have access to all of that information. But when you don't know where to point the compass, sometimes it's hard to know what it is that we're supposed to be listening to.
right. And along those lines, I'm curious then, if you were as a reader to go say a psychic fair in a hotel that
Mhm.
has no history, just newly built, nothing happened there. It's just new land they finally developed versus going, say, to a building where there's a lot of paranormal history and claims there. Do you feel like you've noticed if you've tried it, or your thoughts around would the reader have a stronger connection at one location over the other, or doesn't really phase the connection?
A good reader wouldn't phase a connection. So, a reader who truly knows how to protect themselves and keep themselves, their energy good and strong and protected from any possible entities. It wouldn't matter if it's a new or old hotel. It wouldn't matter if the hotel's haunted or not haunted, because people can bring things to you too. People can be haunted, pets can be haunted, items can be haunted. So it doesn't, so, a good reader who protects themselves well should be okay. Now, there is the odd time where, you can just have an off time or an off day and it's just like, not good, but that that has nothing to do with the location. That has everything to do with your personal energy.
Right. And as you mentioned pets, that's an interesting thought, as because I know there are pet psychics
Hmm.
and pet mediums.
Hmm.
Have you ever read cards for a pet that somebody came in and said, "Hey, I'm having this issue with my pet. Can you tell me what the cards are saying so we can help them?"
I have only ever had pets come through that have already passed, and I can see pets coming into somebody's life, but I don't connect with animals in that way. I do have a couple of friends that are very gifted animal readers. They're beautiful animal readers. That's not me. I guess more of my life purpose is around the individual themselves and helping them be better at who they can be the best person possible. And so that's always been my focus and my guides focus for that reason. So that's the only way pets will come in. Um, I'm I love animals, but I'm also like not gaga over animals.
And I'd be curious to hear your thoughts around when back in the day when I was studying cards, and yes, I did just say back in the day. Uh, and the new generation will have no idea what I'm talking about with that sentence. But you know how that's funny to hear now. Is I was always told never read for yourself. Do you follow that, or do you do readings for yourself?
I do pull cards for myself. Um, it depends on who you are. There were some practitioners that I interviewed for my thesis. That's all they did was read for themselves. They would not read for anybody else. There are some practitioners that would only ever read for somebody else and not read for themselves. And there's people that did both. I think it just depends on who you are as an individual and what you're comfortable with. It's just like the idea that you can never buy your own deck and use it successfully. Well, I bought the deck that I learned on, and I use that very well. Whereas some of the decks that were bought for me, I don't connect with very well at all. You have people who are like, you have to wrap your deck in a cloth like cotton or silk. And there's people who are like, just leave it in the box. It's fine. So it really depends on where, I mean, and this is where people just have different belief systems around it. And this is where I'm like, there are no hard, fast rules. You have to do what's right for you, but that doesn't mean that's right for the next person or for everybody.
Right. And yeah, that's true. And it makes me wonder with, people sitting down and just looking at the card and getting something. What, is your advice to opening and closing that ritual space that you're creating to read the cards? Because I'm a firm believer of you're calling in spirits coming in, there's a
Mhm.
portal open that's allowing this communication. So you have to close that because otherwise you're going to have things coming and going. That's my belief. I don't
Mhm.
know if that's yours.
I have, so in my home, I just moved into my home. And so I've done a very, very deep cleanse of the home. So energies that are coming into my home are only coming in for the highest and best good for anybody that's here. So I automatically kind of have that fail safe of closing. But generally, the way I keep it, I'll do a smudging, and with sage. I did learn from Indigenous people in Alberta, just kind of the art of smudging. So, but it's not something I'm willing to teach, just out of respect for their culture. So I learned it, and I take it upon myself just to try to be as honoring as possible to their tradition. And so I will smudge, and then at the end, I just do a quick wrap on the cards and say thank you. And sometimes it doesn't, so my opening is far more um, kind of ceremonial in nature than my closing. My closing is very simple. There are people who do both a very ceremonious opening and closing. There are people who don't do anything and find it. Um, I don't know how they manage in regards to different spirits and that, but if I do end up forgetting to do an opening or forgetting to do a closing, I already kind of have that fail safe built into my space automatically that nothing is allowed in anyways, unless it's for the highest and best for anybody that's in this house.
All right. And that is something that's really good to have. And, that's something, that people can easily implement and focus on. And so, yeah, they forget because I never really thought about it as opening portals, but then I started looking at what portals are and going, oh my God, that really is a portal, whether we physically went through to open it or not.
Hmm.
By calling that energy in, you opened something. And so I'm like, now I'm looking back and going, man, I'm so glad I had the insight to close and say, like you're saying, thank you to everybody for helping, which is
Hmm.
like a closing to where everybody leaves that came in to talk. But the other question that I get asked a lot, and I find a lot of people have a different answer for, is grounding yourself before and after readings to shake off the energy of that reading. What is your preferred method of that?
So grounding is really interesting. I used to do a lot of grounding exercises where I'd envision kind of, like tree roots growing from my feet and kind of grabbing the earth. I had an experience at Custer's Last Stand in Montana. And my son was like really struggling because there was a spirit attaching himself to my son. And he kept going, I keep feeling this really sharp pain in my back. And I'm like, you're probably feeling, one of these shoulders being shot in the back. So I said, let's do this. What we're going to do is we're going to wrap the energy around these trees and we're going to pull it down into the core of the earth. Well, it turned into, I ended up opening up an entire vortex. It was very grounding. So now, oh, and it just washed away anything that was attached to us. It just took it all away. And there was such a sudden shift. My dad turned around and went, what did you guys just do? Like he felt the energy shift and he had no idea what was going on, right? No clue. And he's
I'll just go
not
ahead.
really an energy person, right? And so ever since then, I just go there. I just go to that vortex. I'm just
Yeah.
like, done.
Yeah, I was gonna say I'm just picturing your face with this huge grin saying, I don't know what you're talking about, Dad. We didn't do anything.
Well, even my son was like going, yeah, okay. Well, and I mean, my dad does have different experiences with spirit and aliens. He actually has alien experience, but he he is open to these different ideas. He just didn't. He just doesn't work with energy the same way that I do, right? But he felt that shift, and he was like, I don't know what you just did, but something just shifted. And I was like, yep, well, I might have opened a bit of a vortex, Dad. Sorry.
And that brings up an interesting point is I've often wondered a lot of the people that I know that are the really strong readers have a past family member who had divination skills or energy working skills that was passed on from their predecessor family member. Do you think there is a true correlation to that, or do you think it's just because they were attuned to it, you just are brought up more attuned to it? You don't actually have a skill level passed into your genetics to do it. It's just you have a stronger awareness because of your past family members who did it.
I think that's more the case. I have a stronger awareness because of past family members that did it. So my grandmother was she was precognitive. She saw so many things happen before they happened. She would see fires in buildings before they would actually take place, which I had happen to me once. It scared the hell out of me. Like I can only imagine how she felt when that was going on. My dad would see auras, and he talked about alien encounters that he had when he was a child. My mom could see spirit and had spirit happen all the time. And she reads ruins. And so when you grow up with that happening all the time, and then your grandmother teaching you tea leaves at 7, it's kind of like you develop an awareness very early on. And just, you know, as people, and I can tell the difference between a real ghost story and somebody who's making something up because I can feel the energy in my body and it's different. And that's just from when my mom and dad would tell the story. We'd sit around the kitchen table. I have a recording of us talking for 2 hours as a family, different ghost stories that we've experienced. you know uh and it was just like after Thanksgiving dinner, we sat around, had dessert, and we talked about our ghost stories.
That's really cool. And I was just, admittedly, I was just looking to see because I remember seeing, like, we're talking about the decks where there was wands, swords, cups, and wands. But I've also seen where it's pentacles and different verbiage for the
Yeah.
same thing. Do you feel like there's a difference when they change the verbiage between the cards of what the meaning could be?
Depends on what the artist is depicting in the drawings, more so than the name of the card itself.
Okay, and while I was looking that up, I actually saw a thing that said the most powerful card in the tarot, and I was like curious, and I was like, really? What would that look like? It actually called out the Fool as the strongest card in tarot, and they said because it's the number 0. Do you feel like that's more for the game, or do you think that's actually kind of true in the readings?
Um, no, I wouldn't call I mean, some people would. Some people really like the Fool's card because it's about the Fool's journey. I know Mary Greer talks a lot about the Fool's journey in relation to just kind of like, because the Fool starts the entire deck, but not all tarot decks have the Fool as the first card either, or card 0. Some of the decks do shift some of these major arcanas around as well. For me, I find the most powerful deck or powerful cards as being more the World card, and even the Tower, which is, people are like, Tower's like horrible, like nobody wants the Tower, but the Tower is about change and modifying that change, and how attached you are to the change is how painful it's going to be. So
Yeah,
the more attached you are to something, the more painful it is. So if you know that about the Tower and you get the Tower, you learn how to unattach yourself from change, and it makes it just so much easier. That's why I find it the more powerful card, because it's helping you make a direction, whereas the Fool's card is like, you're starting out on a new journey. You're starting to be able to look at something in a different way. You're not sure which path you're going to go. It's more like wishy-washy in a world for me, whereas the Tower's like, boom, chaos, change. This is what
right.
you got to focus on. You really need to figure out how to let go of what you need to let go of to be able to make this a smooth transition. So then you can start getting to the Star card and the Sun card and the World card, right? Because those are the ones that you really want to be able to experience.
Right. And if I recall, I think it was the Fool card is usually depicted with someone hanging upside down, or is
That's
that
the
the
Hangman.
hangman? When
Mhm.
the hangman in the tower came up, I would always get the biggest reaction to people from people because they're like, there are people jumping off the tower. And I'm like, that you're looking at a picture, that's not the message coming through. We're not asking you to jump off of something or hang yourself upside down. And but I'm curious, as we talk about symbolism in the deck and how some of them have symbolism, I find it always interesting. The hangman looks like an upside down 4. And I'm curious because 4 is foundation in numerology, if I remember that correctly.
Yep.
So what would be the significance of it upside down? Why would they draw it upside down?
Well, traditionally, so the traditional meaning of the Hangman is the traitor, the person that comes and stabs you in the back. So if you see it in the 4 and you see it the 4 upside down, what is the opposite of foundation? Not having a foundation, having the rug pulled out from under you.
Well, that actually makes sense. I never thought about it that way. But yeah, I was curious if you ever noticed that as well, or
I haven't noticed the four per se with the hangman. Again, I use a very non-traditional deck. So
Yeah. I think that was the weight deck that I saw, the hangman, that where it
mhm.
looks like he's hanging with 1 foot and then 1 foot is off in an angle and comes back across.
Yeah, a lot of people will say the hangman is about looking at things from a different perspective, which is also correct. You know, both are correct. But if you're specifically seeing like a four upside down, I would probably suggest that maybe that person is struggling with their foundation and something's happened. Maybe not as severe as the tower, but something's definitely done something to rock their foundation of who they are.
Mhm. And I know we're getting close on time, but I want to ask one question more around the tarot, because it's something that always interested me, because I've seen it both ways, to where when someone lays the card down, say it's the Chariot, and it'll be face up, and then they'll put the Lovers and it comes upside down. They'll be like, "Oh," and they'll flip it over and make it right side up, and they're like, "Yeah, it doesn't matter which way it comes up. This is what it means." And then I've had other people who are like, "Oh no, this card is upside down, so we need to really look at this. There's something wrong here
Hmm.
as to why it came up." And I've wondered too, is are cards coming up upside down because they were put in the deck, and when they shuffled and drew, the card was upside down in the deck and that's why it's upside down coming out? Or do you feel like it's the universe is saying, "Hey, look, we really need to look here, so we're going to make it different than the other cards"?
So I have decks where I will read reverse and I have decks where I will not. So really for me it depends on the deck that I have in front of me as to whether or not I'll read reverse. Um the the idea is that I there is no wrong answer. I mean, that's the beautiful thing about tarot and being involved in working with these different modalities at this particular time. We haven't created the dogma like you have with the Bible, right?
Right.
We don't have it down pat. We're creating it as we go, which is why it's so beautiful because it's like there are no rules. There's the rules that you create for yourself, but there really are no rules. So, it's up to you to decide whether or not you're comfortable reading reverse. They have 78 cards in the deck. If you're going, I'm not reading reverse, you're still going to get the same message as if you are reading reverse cards. 78 cards gives you a hell of a lot of meanings. And then when you put out multiple cards, you're even going to get more information. There's no, that's a lot of information. Just reading them upright. So you don't even need to reverse them if you don't want to. It's just, there's
Right.
a lot of information.
Yeah. And like I said too, it's like my mind automatically goes, "Well, how do I know that's something I need to work on? Because how do I know it wasn't when you put it together, the deck together in the box, you had everyone right side up." And
It,
so yeah, that's like my mind goes into skeptic mode of, "Wait, how can I be sure this card really wasn't already upside down?"
well, and you don't. And that's the thing. Like you have to make a conscious decision when you're shuffling the deck. I'm going to be reading, and usually, like, I'll know right away whether or not I'm going to deal with reversals with my deck or not. The one that I use is very modern day black and white pictures. I do not reverse those cards. Those are all upright. I don't read anything in reverse because I have enough information from those cards themselves that I don't need reverse. But if I'm reading something like a Rider Waite deck with Pamela Colin Smith art, I read them. I'll read them both upright and reverse.
Okay. Yeah. So where can people find you?
So the best way to find me, you can find me on LinkedIn, and Jessica Williams. That's where I have my professional account with my thesis information. You can also find me on Facebook at Larkin Point. That's my Facebook page. I'm still building my business page, or you can find me with Jessica Newhook. So I'm Jessica Williams in LinkedIn, Jessica Newhook on Facebook. And you can send me a message, give me a quick follow, reach out to me. Yep, or you can email me. My email address is jcw450@mun.com.
Yeah, you want to give that again because people may be trying to write that down.
Sure. That's JCW450 at mun.com. Or no, but .ca. Hold on.
Oh,
I don't even know my own email address. .ca. You're not going to
oops.
get anywhere with .com.
I was typing into the chat room and hit send before you corrected it. I was like, uh-oh. So it's .ca now?
.ca. Yep, sorry.
That's okay. I just won't put it up on the screen, the incorrect version. I'll pop up. Let's see. Here we go. Oh, wait, that's the wrong one. My screen
And if
didn't
anybody
advance. My
wants to read
apologies.
my thesis, they can read my thesis just by going to the MUN library, and type in The Religion of Tarot. It's a free download at the library for Memorial University of Newfoundland and Labrador.
Well, thank you for coming on and everything. And of your life experience so far, what would be a golden nugget you would like to leave the audience with?
Always expect the unexpected. You never know what's going to happen.
Ooh,
And live in the moment. Don't forget to be grateful for what you have because you just never know what's going to happen next.
I like that. So thank you to everyone in the chat room. Thank you, Jessica, for coming on the show and sharing your gift and knowledge with us. I greatly appreciate it.
Oh, you're welcome.
We'll have to have you on again sometime.
I'd love that anytime. You take care, and blessings to everybody. It was an honor to share this time with you today.
Yes, and to everyone out there, make it a wonderful day, afternoon, evening. If you're sleeping, have yourself some sweet dreams and wake up and take on each day with newfound love. And as Jessica said, expect the unexpected. You never know what's coming, and be positive about it. And one thing I will add is I hear a lot of people feel like when things aren't going positive, they start to get down on themselves. And I always like to say, don't give up, because around the corner, that proverbial corner, could be the lifeline you're looking for that'll pull you out and bring you back into full light. So always have hope. So I'm going to leave you all with that. And I will say good night, everyone.
Good night.